Ed Bernstein Show. Now, here's Ed.
Hi, welcome to our show. You know, it seems like when you talk about political offices that secretaries of state have become so important in our country. And let me introduce those of you who don't know our Secretary of State because he's relatively new and he's a fresh face and lots of energy, Cisco Aguilar.
Thank you, Ed.
And I can call you, also known as Cisco.
Please call me Cisco in the
Okay.
conversation. That's easier.
But on the ballot, it's Francisco?
It's Francisco Cisco Aguilar, so that
Oh,
people
you
who know
did
me
a whole
by
thing.
know, we were able to capture both.
You were elected in the last election.
That is correct.
You know, you look around the country, and there's all these lawsuits around the country regarding election reform, regarding the past election. I don't know. In Nevada, things seem to go really well.
Look, Nevada has some of the most secure and fair elections in the entire country. And I'm not just saying that as an elections regulator. I'm saying that because we've had independent audits come into the state, look at our processes, look at our systems, and say, Nevada, you're doing a great job. But what we're doing even better is providing access to the ballot box. Every eligible voter in Nevada has access to the ballot box like no other state in the country. And we're seeing that participation level rise because of that access.
And when you talk about that kind of access, I mean, we're talking, there's several ways to vote. Can we go through them? Okay.
Sure.
I mean, okay, voting day, you can go in person.
Absolutely.
Old school.
Yes,
Some
you can.
people like to do that. I love that photograph I have on my wall with me and my three daughters all, walking into a voting booth, go vote on election day.
Correct.
Great photograph. Right? But I also remember the days with my mother, my father, they couldn't get around very much, and they would always have that absentee ballot, no, not absentee, just the mail-in ballot, and be calling their son, hey, who should I vote for?
Well, look, it also, mail-in ballots give a voter an opportunity to really research who the candidates are. If you look at the judges' races, most people aren't familiar with a lot of our judges. And if you have a mail ballot in front of you at home, you have the opportunity to understand what position each of those judges takes and then vote for the best qualified candidate you believe should be in that seat.
Very well said, because, look, my pet peeve is the judicial races. We try our best on our show here to get as many judicial candidates as we can because nobody knows who to vote for a judge. My parents didn't know, and my parents are active, readers of newspapers. Because where do you go to get news? You go into a judicial website, and it's just a lot of fluff about that particular judge. Right? Very little is written in the newspapers. It's very hard to find information about judges. You're an attorney. You know what happens. Our clients, our families, they call us because we work with judges all the time, and they ask your advice on who to vote for.
And there's lawyers like me who were transactional. We were business attorneys. We didn't step foot in a courtroom. And sometimes I don't even know who the judges are. And so it helps me understand and make better decisions about what we need from our judicial system.
But it hadn't occurred to me, and I think you're 100% correct, Cisco, that when people have the ballot in front of them, they can really think it through. When you go to a voting booth, you kind of rush through it. There's a line behind you. It may be 110 degrees outside. There's people looking over your shoulder. It's... you're right. You take your time and think things through.
Well, and you bring up a great point, too, is if somebody wants to vote on Election Day at a polling location, they can. But if you saw what happened this last election cycle, the first day of early voting, we had massive winds here in southern Nevada. Election Day, we had 2 major snowstorms, both in the north and in the south. So people, when they woke up and saw what was occurring with the weather, instead of having to go to the polling location, they still had the option to use their mail ballot and could take that mail ballot and drop it off at the polling location, or they can mail it back to the county clerk.
And what's the difference between a mail-in ballot or an early voting ballot and an absentee ballot?
So they're pretty much, an early ballot is you get your mail ballot. That is your ballot. You can vote it, drop it off at a polling location, you can mail it in. Early voting, you can show up. There are physical polling locations where you can actually vote on a polling machine. And then absentee ballots are no longer exists because we have the universal mail ballot program.
So it replaces
Correct.
the absentee. So like
Correct.
Military out of the country.
Well, no,
Yeah.
there's another system now,
okay.
and it's called EASE, and that allows military members overseas, Nevada citizens overseas. It also allows people who are homebound because of a disability or an illness to still vote, and it's done electronically, which is, there's a very heavy security around that process as well. So Nevada's at the forefront of mobile voting as well, and giving opportunities to voters across the state and out of the state, but still Nevadans, the opportunity to have a say in what the state looks like.
You know, it's always seemed amazing to me that people are concerned about online voting, but they're not concerned about their online banking.
No, and
It didn't make a lot of sense to me.
So I just had the recent opportunity to speak at South by Southwest in Austin. And that is, you know, future generational thinkers. It's young people. And every new registered voter that's coming on board is what they call a digital native. They have lived their entire lives with their phone or technology. They are starting to ask the question about how do we make better efforts to vote by electronically. You can transfer billions of dollars, but the challenge is, yes, that's going to be an incremental step because the market adoption for a lot of Americans is going to take some time. Estonia has full mobile voting, but they have a different process within their country to identify their citizens. And every citizen gets a national ID card, which is their social security card. It's like a passport. It's everything into one, which has some high technology in that ID that allows them to be able to vote and do it securely. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually planning to go out to Estonia to kind of see what this looks like.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, like you're as you were saying, I was thinking about like FedEx.
Yeah.
Like the danger in FedEx is not the ordering part and the paying part. It's like somebody drops at your door and it disappears. Right. It's the human element. So the technology stuff all seems to work pretty
Right.
good. But when you talk about ID, for instance, I mean, that seems to be a big issue for people who are against making voting easier. I mean, I always thought it should be the easiest thing in the world.
Correct. We do have an ID and identification process when a voter registers to vote. A registered voter has to show a form of ID when they register. Also, too, when you do same-day voter registration, we now have same-day voter registration. And that allows somebody who didn't register previously show up at a poll and say, I have moved, I now live in this district, I would like to vote in this election. They can do that, and they get what's called a provisional ballot until they show some form of ID to legitimize who that voter is. So we do have voter ID in our process. I understand the communication and the discussion around universal ID, but again, we have to understand the consequences. I think you and I as lawyers understand what it means to have a constitutional fundamental right. And when you have that fundamental right, that you have to protect that right with the utmost protection ever, because if you do something to chip away at it, that's just the beginning. And our fundamental right to vote is one of the most critical things we have as Americans and makes us so special. And I'm going to stand up and say, yes, I understand it, and logically it makes sense, but when you start to learn the unintended consequences of it, you start to go, we have to stand up and protect that fundamental right.
This is why you're the Secretary of State. I could take that last minute of what you just said and make a TV commercial out of it, and this guy would be Secretary of State. Well said.
No, look, and it impacts our vulnerable communities the most. It's mostly our elderly communities that get impacted by voter ID. It's those individuals that live in a rural community.
Because they don't drive anymore.
They don't drive, and there's not a DMV accessible to them.
Right.
And so you're shutting out a population of Nevadans from being engaged in the process, and those are the exact Nevadans we need to have in the process.
I'm married to a woman from Peru. In Peru.
You're a lucky man.
Yeah, a very lucky man. In Peru, when you vote, they take your finger and they implant some sort of, I was going to say magic marker, a permanent marker, on your finger. And you walk around Lima, if you don't have this mark on your finger, having had voted, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost like a 99% success rate in some of these countries. Now, I'm not suggesting that because
Peru has its own challenges.
Peru has its own challenges. The president just got arrested there recently, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But my point is, there's ways to, there's a lot of places where we take this right for granted, and it's so important in so many other countries, that people are living and dying for it every day.
It's very true. And, To say you need an ID to board an airplane or buy a beer, that just makes my soul hurt, because buying a beer is not a fundamental right. Voting is a fundamental right. And that's where, as Americans, we are all equal. And that's one opportunity for us to share that experience and be able to determine what we want our state and our country to look like in the future.
So when all is said and done, the election passed. There were some lawsuits. I mean, there was some claim.
Nevada has no existing lawsuits over voter fraud. There are no instances of massive or even individual voter fraud.
But there was some people tried to allude to it and try to do something with the electors. Can you explain the whole elector situation for those of us who don't get it?
Yeah, we have to send electors to Washington to cast the ballots on behalf of part of the Electoral College. A group of individuals tried to supplement that process and send over another ballot that wasn't legitimate. And so it takes a very serious and very traditional process in this state, in this country, and I think makes a mockery of it. And I think that hurts even more than the actual act of, trying to. What it does is takes away what Nevadans actually said they wanted, right? They're saying, thank you, Nevadans, you voted, you expressed your opinion, you expressed your voice, but we don't really think that. We, a small group of individuals, think differently, and we're going to make sure that this is the voice of Nevada.
And who are these groups? I mean, shouldn't they be apolitical, this group?
Well, I think it's a balance, right? It's making sure, looking at who the electorate is and saying, this is who Nevada is, this is what but they also have to vote what the voters intended Nevada to do. So there is a bill running through the legislature to make that a felony. That's going to be, Skip Daly from Northern Nevada has introduced that bill, and it's my job as Secretary of State to sit back and watch, and then whatever the law is, it's my responsibility to implement. Look, I could have policy opinions, but at the end of the day, it's my job as Secretary of State to make sure that I'm doing what Nevadas have told me to do and to follow the law.
I'm not all that familiar with what's been going on in Tennessee. I don't know if it's within your expertise or not, but the Republican legislature there, what is the term?
They expelled 2 members.
Expelled some Democrats because they didn't believe in they're upset because they were protesting some gun control law or something. Is that something that can happen in our state?
Look, I think the fact that we as Nevadans try to work together on solutions and try to come together and have conversations. I understand there are rules of decorum on the floor of the legislature, and that there may be some belief that decorum was violated. But in the end, what you're doing is taking away a voice of a population of citizens. Those 2 individuals who were expelled represented, I believe, about 140,000 Tennesseans. And to take a voice away from that population, I think, is a really significant move. That should always be a last resort in a situation. And thankfully, their local communities have reappointed them back to those seats, so those communities do have a voice again in their state legislature. I had a really interesting interaction with Tennessee recently at a conference, and the Tennessee Secretary of State stood up and said, a big issue for us secretaries is making sure we have the funding necessary to run elections appropriately. And the federal government has come in through HAVA funds, which allows us to buy equipment for our bigger counties, for our rural counties. Some of our rural counties need support and need help to have the equipment to run fair and secure elections. Well, we depend sometimes on the federal government for those resources, like we do with our educational system. So the Secretary of State in Tennessee stood up and said, Tennessee no longer needs or wants federal funding for our elections process. And my response is, hey, we'll take it in Nevada because we can use those resources appropriately to help our rural communities. And the stronger our rural communities are in implementing elections also increases the opportunity for our tribal communities to have a voice in our process.
Right, and we have a lot of remote areas that most of us don't really think about. It's your job to represent them all.
Right.
Right. You talk about Indian areas and some of these remote areas, and getting votes in and out of them. It's not an easy task. There's so much going on in this world of yours. There's a lawsuit regarding voting machines that are suing Fox News.
Yes.
Right. Old Dominican, is that the name of it?
Old Dominion. Dominion machines.
Dominion, Old Dominion. Do we use those machines?
We do.
And they
15 of our 17 counties use Dominion machines. Clark uses them. I was just in Douglas County. They use Dominion machines. We have 2 counties that use another product, and those machines work just as well. And it's up to the local governments, the local county commissions, to determine what's in the best interest of their citizens. And then it's my job to make sure that they're following along the implementation of those. Look, it's a fascinating suit for a lot of different reasons, and I think we're going to watch it progress. But in the meantime, we still have to run our elections, and we know that the machines actually work, and we're going to continue to use them.
How do we know the machines work? I mean, because once the election's over, is there a process to check everything in the machine?
Yes.
How does that
It actually,
work?
one is there's updates to the machines. We check them from a legal standpoint. Dominion has updates, and they come and update the machines. And then we actually use the Nevada Gaming Control Board to verify those updates to ensure that they are meeting the expectations and the standards that we need them to make. So we have independent reviews by third-party organizations who are separate from Dominion, and then we use our own organization, government. The Nevada Gaming Control Board has incredible opportunity to check technology, to understand the processes, and to verify that the systems are actually doing what they say they do. Yeah. And we're lucky because we're one of the states that have such a government agency that does such great work. And they do it because of the gaming machines in the casinos.
Right. Very, very strict. Not perfect, and nobody's perfect, but I mean, they are as strict as you come in dotting those I's and crossing those
Correct.
T's and checking. Well, they're in the business of checking things,
Correct.
right? Checking backgrounds, checking bank
Because
records.
again, the people are not going to come to Nevada unless there is a level of trust. And we have to ensure that trust exists. And thankfully, the Nevada Gaming Control Board does that for our gaming customers. And they also help us because they understand the technology and the processes, and they do it for us on the voting machines.
You're involved in elections oftentimes throughout the year. I mean, we were chatting here talking before the show. I didn't realize we had a couple elections going on around the state within the last month or so, right?
That's good. This past Monday, we had the special election for the Henderson City Council. Right. So it was a great opportunity for me to see the planning of that process, to see the implementation of that process, to have conversations, and to have foresight to start to plan ahead and say, okay, if this occurs on Election Day, what is our response? If this occurs, what happens? Also that same day, we met with Metro, the FBI, Homeland Security, to talk about some of these issues and to plan ahead for the 24 election. We have 18 months to plan. We are going to have a presidential primary election in February of 24. That's just as important to those parties, and we need to be ready to go on those days. The other great thing we do is we have a $30 million appropriation request. The governor thankfully put it in his recommended budget, which I'm grateful for, and it's before the legislature now. What it's going to do is allow us to build an election management system that's going to implement top-down voter registration. Right now, all 17 counties have their own processes and systems for voter registration. It'll flip. The Secretary of State's office will manage that process and then send that information down to the 17 counties. So you have one system, one secure system. The information is unified across the board. Right now, you're taking 17 different processes and trying to keep it in one database. It gets a little complicated. But also, too, it'll bring transparency to the process even more. You order pizza on Postmates. You track it from the time you order to the time the pizza goes in the oven. You will be able to do the same thing with your ballot. You know when it was mailed to you from the clerk's office. You know when it's hit the mail truck. You know when it's been delivered. You know when it's been received by the mail.
Love it.
Yeah. I'm really excited.
I'm going to give you applause on this. And I'm going to tell you why. On Election Day, it is so frustrating to me for the election and the day after, because a lot of the local candidates are very important to me. We talked about your judicial candidates.
Right.
We talked about that school board.
Right.
Some of the legislative positions. I can't find them anywhere. I go into the county website; they're not there. You go into the state; it's not a state person; it's a county person or a municipal person. Right. How do you find it all? And it's all going to be connected and
Yes.
in one location. Yes. Your office. Love it.
I can even go onto the dashboard, and we watched it in this Henderson election, this
Right.
technology work, and from the Clark County election headquarters, we could see how long the line was and what the wait time was, how many ballots had been processed. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. I'm shocked when I got into this office that the Secretary of State didn't have ready to available data to be able to see this information. When I ask these questions, we have to call the 17 counties, get that information, and then put it into our own data set.
Yeah, which seems to be not the safest way to do
No,
things.
well,
right?
and also, too, you can't make major decisions off of anecdotal information. You have to make major decisions that impact every citizen by having facts and data. And this is really going to help with it. It's also going to help clean up our voter rolls, which is very important.
Yeah. How do they get cleaned up?
One is making sure the database is secure, right? The information is up to date, and that we are continually scrubbing it to make sure if there's duplicative data, we can eliminate it or we can figure out what the correct data is. It also gives an easy opportunity for Nevadans to go in and update the information themselves. The other technology we'll be able to take advantage of is whenever you change your address with the Postal Service, we can take that information and update our voter rolls so that we know where you are. If you've moved out of state, we can take you off of the voter rolls so that there are not ballots out there that shouldn't be out in the universe.
Good idea. And look, this is a lot on your plate to do all this, but there's so much more.
Yes.
Because there's a whole other world that you deal with, and it's the business of Nevada.
That is correct.
It's the companies, the corporations, the LLCs, the partnerships, the sole proprietorships, all of that. Any state license, at some point has to go through your office, right? And in today's world, it means, hey, how do we do this effectively, efficiently, and make it work for the consumer as well as for the information we're trying to extract?
The Nevada economy is based on small business. We need to be at the forefront of making sure our small businesses have what they need to grow and build. They hire our neighbors, they're building our community centers. And so if we're not making it easy for them, they're going to go elsewhere. For example, the Silver Flume system generates about $220 million on an annual basis.
And can you stop right there?
Yes.
Silver Flume is what?
It is the data filing product that every Nevadan business owner has to use to do their annual filing. Every year they have to go in and say, yes, we still exist. Here's our updated information. It's also if you're an entrepreneur who's starting a business, you have to go file with the Secretary of State's office through Silver Flume. You take that information to a bank. They open a bank account for you. Once you have an account established, you can have your investors send in their investment. You can get the capital you need from a bank through a loan. So this is critical to the process. But Silver Flume generates, we used to be the Delaware of the West. Delaware is the gold standard in this country for corporate and business filings. We were the Delaware of the West. Our system is broken, and people are frustrated with it because it's not logical, it's not easy to use. I wake up every morning praying the system is still up and running. And that system generates $220 million on an annual basis. However, over the last 7 to 8 years, we've lost 30% of our market share to states like Wyoming. And if you take that $220 million times 30%, that's $60 million we're giving to other states like Wyoming when it should be here in our state, investing in our schools, investing in business growth, investing in infrastructure and healthcare. And so it's my job to rebuild that system so we can bring back some of that market share.
And we're losing it because of the difficulty in using the system?
That is correct. Because what's happening is 80% of our business in Silver Flume comes through registered agents. The registered agents are frustrated with the system, and they're telling new businesses to go elsewhere. We have lawyers and law firms in this state that are frustrated with it as well, and they're telling their clients to go to Wyoming because, in a year or 2 years, after they build this business, they may sell it, they may merge it. And if they can't get a closing done at a certain time, there are tax consequences. And they need to go to a state where it's easy to do, and they know that the system is going to work.
And you would think Nevada would have a head start on that because of our tax situation, our state tax, and then people want to come to Nevada.
And our laws are great laws for business owners and entrepreneurs. People in business are willing to pay a premium for that, but they're not going to suffer because of a lack of a
So how do we fix this, Cisco? Is this
it's
all
an investment.
about money? It's about money?
I asked, went to the governor, asked for $15 million to rebuild the system. He, again, thankfully saw the logic behind this and put it in his recommended budget.
Is that enough money, $15 million?
I don't know. As I've been in the office now for 3 months, I'm learning more and more about what the system needs. And so we're trying to find additional revenue to allocate that. We did put in a request to our U.S. Senate delegation to match with infrastructure dollars to be able to increase that allotment. But it takes investment. But you, as a business owner, if you were able to generate $220 million on an annual basis, $15 million in an investment is a no-brainer decision.
For sure. See, and then once that happens, how do you bring back the business?
it's our REAs, our registered agents, want to do business in Nevada because of our laws.
Explain resident agents for
So-
our viewers who don't understand it.
Resident agents are basically individuals. One, when you file for a business in Nevada, you have to list another party that can receive service. So if you're going to be sued as a business or you're going to receive a official notification from your lender, there has to be an address on there that they can send it to who's a person other than you, so they are making sure you actually receive the communication.
So you can't say I never received this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And registered agents have built a business doing this. They advise on a lot of states, on a lot of business matters. They are 80% of our business. They are our biggest marketers of this state. And if we can get them on board with the process, that was one of the very first meetings I had as Secretary of State. I called in the resident agents to the office and I said, what do we need to do to be the best state in the country for corporate filings? And they have been aggressive about telling me what we need to do. We get them satisfied. The lawyer and the law firms are going to be happy. They're going to start referring business back to Nevada. And it's a snowball effect. It's just going to bring us back to where we need to be.
Well, I got to tell you, it's very encouraging to see fresh, young face like yours with the kind of energy and intelligence that you have that's taking on this, what could be a horrible issue here in Nevada. We don't want to end up in lawsuits like some of these other states, and we haven't been, and everything seems to be working well here, and let's try to make it better. Your Secretary of State, Cisco Aguilar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cisco.
Appreciate it.
My name is George Tice, and I'm a real client of Ed Bernstein. So I was in a really bad car accident, head-on collision. I had to have surgery, and I needed a good attorney. So I immediately thought of Ed. Ed is tenacious, and he knows what he's doing, so he was my best choice. He cares about his clients, and he cares about the results of the case.
The most important decision you can make when hiring a lawyer is choosing the right lawyer for your case. We are that firm.